welcome. I'm Riza with Full Awakening, and I'm here to bring you episode 20 of Stories of Awakening. I'm here with a very special guest today, Mr. Lee Harris, a good friend of mine and a mentor and a teacher to many, many, many in our community. I'm delighted to be here with him. He is an intuitive guide. He's a channeler, a musician, a teacher, and a leader in Lee Harris Energy. He puts out these wonderful energy updates. So if you haven't seen them yet, you should definitely look them up on YouTube or on his site. The first of the month has become less about mortgage being paid and more about Lee's energy update going live.
Oh.
So it's given me a beautiful new outlook on the first of the month. So definitely check those out. He's very, very helpful with his channeling and with his advice and his teaching. And yeah, he's here to share a little time with us today. Welcome, Lee.
Hello, love. It's so good to be with you. It's lovely to see you and it's lovely to be here. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. So I've heard your story, but our audience may not have heard your story. And so I'm wondering if you'd like to share a little bit about how you feel your awakening began.
Yeah, for me, it was a few different stages. And if I would say that for me, awakening is transformation. So whether it's that you spiritually have an experience that transforms your view and your senses in a very profound and marked way, or whether it's that a terrible divorce or the death of a loved one or the loss of something that you thought would always be there or wasn't going to go away overnight is the catalyst for that transformation. To me, that's how I see we awaken into higher levels of consciousness, awareness, and live our lives differently afterwards. You know, nothing's quite ever the same. So in a weird way, well, it's not weird at all. You know, we're going through one as a world this year in 2020 with coronavirus. It's the biggest collective awakening I have ever seen on the planet. It doesn't mean everybody agrees about what's going on. And it doesn't mean that there isn't all kinds of conflict and fear and all that stuff. But there's a massive change happening. So for me, the first most significant change that happened was I was very overweight from the age of about 8, 9 onwards. I developed addictive eating around sugar. And I was taken to Weight Watchers age 10. I was the only child at Weight Watchers. I think I was the only man in the room as well, even though I was a boy, but you know what I mean? It was back then, it was very much just, you know, mostly women of a certain age and me age 10. But what happened then was I yo-yo dieted through my teens and couldn't stop my addictive binge eating because it was the way I was coping with my unexpressed emotions. I say this now looking back, I didn't get this at the time. I was just trying to quell the pain and soothe myself. But also I realized my intuition and my sensitivity, neither of which had been diagnosed to me or nor was anybody talking about. It wasn't like anyone was around me going, I think that intuitive message that you're having means this, and this is how you should follow it through. So I would say the first awakening happened for me when I was 16 years old. I went to a new school, or in England we called it college. So it's what you guys in America would call high school. And it was much more creative and it was much more me. And it was also mixed gender, whereas I'd been sent to an all boys secondary school, which for someone like me was a disaster. I think my parents thought it would toughen me up. And I would say it was like the worst 6 years of my life. But I now also see it was the making of me because I learned a lot about my wounds, my fears, didn't grow from them at the time, but now I look back and see that they were part of my ladder. So I lost 60 pounds in weight between the ages of 16 and a half and 18. And for anybody who's ever lost weight or knows people who've lost weight, it's huge because what actually happens is it's not just about how you look. Number one, it transforms how you feel. But for someone like me, who was very good at sensing and reading other people, it's a massive identity shift because people who want to judge the way you look when you're very overweight were very transparent to me. So I could walk into a room and someone could just kind of look at me and just look me up and down and hold my stare for just a second too long. And I knew that what they were thinking wasn't good. I knew that I had just been assessed based on the way that I looked. So to go in a year and a half to transform my body quite radically, it taught me a lot about identity and the outer shell that we are judged by. And I remember all I ever wanted when I was the fat kid, the unhappy fat kid, I should say, because I, all through my life, I've known other people who are heavier or fuller figured. And, it actually feels like they're like, this feels right to me. It feels right to me to be a bit more solid. That wasn't my story. My story was I had an addictive eating tendency that I couldn't stop and didn't know how to, and didn't know I had a problem. And so going into that transformation of suddenly being viewed perhaps more appealingly made me not trust people. I was like, oh, Jesus, well, I wanted to be this other thing, but now the same people who would have looked me up and down with semi-disgust now want to be next to me because they like what they see on the outer shell. So I would say that was like the first formative awakening of my life. And as soon as I lost the weight, I no longer had the same level of shielding. I had bulimia for about a year because I couldn't stop the binging, but I was determined I didn't want to go back on the weight. Managed to stop the bulimia thanks to my mum discovering me one day, and her pain and horror and tears about finding out that I'd been throwing up so cut me to the quick that it was like a wake-up call. And so I stopped that behavior. But then from that age onwards, I really got in touch with my intuition. It's like I was no longer stuffing, I was no longer numbing. So all of a sudden, my intuition came online in a really big way. But the funny thing about it is, it wasn't like at 19, I was like, oh, I'm really intuitive. My intuition's come online. It was like a whole bunch of crazy stuff happened that at the time just felt chaotic and weird. And I was like, oh my God, what is this? And it was thankfully just a few people, a couple of very significant people who had the eyes to see me and were able to take me under their wing. And like one of them, one day, I remember when I was 19, she said to me, you're very intuitive, don't you? And I was like, huh? I was kind of like, who is she talking to? Like literally, I, just totally did not identify in that way, but then had so many experiences over the next few years. Suddenly it was like, oh, you've always been sensing other worlds, but you had to compartmentalize and you had to deny. So, I won't bore you with all the details, but really that was kind of the awakening. One was the weight loss. Awakening 2 was the intuition coming online. Awakening 3 was hearing my guides, which happened around a year after I started to compose music. From nowhere, like at the age of, I'd always loved music. I'd sung as a kid, but at the age of 21, I started hearing music. And honestly, that for me was magic. I was like, oh my God, I just want to write music. That's like my joy. But then a year later, I heard the voice of my guides. I'd been going to self-growth workshops. I'd been reading spiritual books. I was really into self-growth and spirituality. And truth be told, it was like my hobby. It was like what I did at the weekend. But I never ever thought that I would channel. I was a little skeptical of channeling. I think even though I was a believer, I probably thought people were making it up because that's what we were trained to believe. We were trained to believe, oh, they're just making it up. Even today, you'll see like comments of people who don't believe psychics. And I'm like, you got to be really effing crazy to want to go out. I'm sorry, but you really have. Like, trust me. I was the fat kid. I also realized I was gay. The last thing I wanted to then become was a channeler, because when you've had society ostracize you for certain reasons, you ain't running towards that again. So, I think it's always very interesting when those people have those opinions, because it just shows me they clearly have never had any direct experience of that. So rather than believe that others might be, they want to fight or kind of kill those people off out of their reality so they don't have to think it might be a thing. Anyway, we don't need to give them any more airtime. So I very nervously went about giving friends readings because they asked me to. So people that would learn, I got messages, and it kind of got known to a small group of my friends. And that kind of set me off. And ever since then, 22 years ago, I've had a series of awakenings. My most recent one was about 7 months ago, and lasted for a good 3-4 days. And, you know, I'm still integrating it as awakenings work.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Wow, there's so much. Oh, there's so much juice in what you just gave us, Lee. The word that keeps popping for me is trust. So I want to go back to that point before we move on. This idea that it was hard to trust people when you noticed how superficial their leanings were, right? So you lost the weight and all of a sudden people treated you differently. And then how do you trust people's attention, right? And for me, that immediately links to this moment that you're in right now, where you're a very popular teacher and you have a lot of people who appreciate you and love you, right? And how does that trust work for you in friendships now and in your life? Does that come in at all?
It's a really good question. I think number one, you know, the compartmentalizing thing still exists for me because I forget what I do. I know that sounds really weird because I spend a lot of my week doing these things, but I do it so privately. I mean, that's the thing. You know, it's when I do the energy updates, there was a period where I worked with a cameraman on them after a few years because I thought, oh, this might be good. And then I decided, no, I've lost the intimacy and I'm worried I'm reading him. You know what I mean? Whereas when it's just me and the camera, so I literally at one point I had to say to him, don't stand behind the camera because I'm going to start talking about you and your wife. You know, it's kind of like, I need you over there. Because when I'm in that mode with the energy update, I'm listening to the chorus of voices that I'm speaking to, and I'm kind of saying what I need to say for them. So I work in a very intimate way. So even though I now have a team and the work is, you know, if you'd have shown me a snapshot of this moment 16 years ago, I literally would have died. Like I would have died. No, really, I'm not even kidding. I would have died. I would have been horrified, and I wouldn't have recognized perhaps the level of confidence or comfortability that I have now withstanding for all of this, because back then I was very worried about what people would think, and you know, the world was different. What I did was still weirder in a way than it is perhaps now. I think honestly I live a very quiet life, even though my work reaches a lot of people, and it really pleases me that it helps people. I mean, it really does. But I see that as everyone else's business, meaning I learned early on when doing live events that people can have a euphoric experience in themselves because of something that you've created. And that is not yours to tamper with, that's theirs. And I remember when I went to some self-growth workshops in my early 20s, I had a kind of reverence and love for the workshop leader, like everybody did. And everybody wanted to talk to him, you know, oh, if I could just get a few minutes, you know. So I remember that. I have deep respect for that moment in someone's process, but I think you have to deeply respect that for somebody. So it's very easy for me now, if somebody is in front of me and is grateful for something I've done, or is perhaps emotional because, you know, suddenly you're not just a YouTube video, and that can be a bit dysmorphic for people. You know, I remember once a woman in IKEA stopped me and burst into tears and then couldn't quite look me in the eye. And she kind of said, it's weird seeing you off YouTube, you know, but I really felt for her because I, you know, bless her, like she was having an emotional, I kind of don't feel, I feel like in those moments, I'm now a good ambassador for the work. I don't feel like that's me, the person that my friends know or at home, or it's the work, and it's what the work is doing for people. And I'm deeply grateful to serve the work. But I think I know the difference between the work and even though I'm very honest in the work, but you know what I mean? It's like there's a, the work is a thing that goes out for people and for people to have an experience with, and the work is collective. It's not mine, it's not me, it's a group conversation. So I
Mm-hmm.
think with trust, it's been interesting. I think I'm lucky I'm 44. If I was in this position in my 20s, it would be a mess, and I would be learning a lot of boundary lessons. But I learned a lot of boundary lessons in my personal life, in my work life. So I'm pretty clean about it now. And the only thing that I would say about all of it that I remember being a little bit disappointed by was whenever I would be at like an event where I was a guest speaker, because I'm good at reading people, it would always blow my mind when I would watch somebody backstage be rude to somebody in the room, like be rude to perhaps someone who was stocking the table with water or snacks for people who are there speaking. And then they turn around and be really nice to me. And I'd be like, no, that doesn't. And the only reason they were nice to me was because of some perceived status they thought I had, or because I was a speaker, or perhaps they did know me. And so I'm really good at that. I have a really good bullshit-ometer. So yeah, it's not actually been a problem, but honestly, I live a really quiet life when I'm not like at a public event, and I like it that way.
Mm-hmm. That's wonderful. I feel like the image I get is that you have a well enough completed sense of self, right? That you developed enough of a sense of self and self-value and self-worth internally, so that no longer needs, there isn't a need from others to provide that for you, because I think that's where that wobbly relationship stuff can come into people's lives, into our relationships, where we desire a certain amount of affirmation or a certain amount of feedback or a certain amount of build up from someone else. And if you're in a position of perceived power, then that can get really sort of cloudy and wobbly for everyone involved. So.
Yeah, well said. And I think that's where you have to do your own healing. I think when you're in a public job, if of course it can go both ways, but let's say if you are appreciated by a number of people for that public job, it's very odd experience. It's not an experience many people have unless they too have done something that's affecting directly a lot of people that can then give you feedback. So I think you've always got to kind of treat that with some reverence, because it's a very odd experience, and I think the internet affords that more now. But I also feel like if you are still feeding on your audience or playing power abuse games years later, then what you thought was going to heal you didn't heal you, which is, oh, I just want to feel attention or validated, or I just like to know that something I've done has affected someone. Well, then that was a lie. Because if you don't have that moment and go, oh, this is cool, I now know what it's like to have done something that someone, and you don't then move on and graduate and add up some more levels of your own self-growth, then you're really just, making everyone else a hostage to your wounds, which is very unfair when those people are gracious enough to appreciate or get into an exchange with you of something that you did. I think there's a high level of responsibility that you have to hold around all that stuff. That's my perspective. Other people might feel differently.
I love that perspective, though. And I think that the word that keeps coming up is respecto, or respect and reverence. You keep saying reverence, and I think that that's beautiful. The thing that comes up for me is around acting, right? We both have a history in acting, and I think this is something you experience a lot when you act and you have done a role that has really touched people, and the audience, but after the show, when you go out and everyone's talking to each other, people can have this really intense projection onto you as the actor when, there's a lot of us in this transformational community who have come up through theater. And I think that for a lot of us, it's our first training ground for shamanism, because it is the way that we let spirit through, and I remember being a director and directing like my actors into a meditation to basically find the spirit of their character and to like bring it into their body. And it's like very shamanic practice. Now that I look back on it, I'm like, wow, I was training for something else, wasn't I? But, I think that's the same thing when you're doing the job and you have reverence for your role as the person bringing in the energy or the information for everyone's benefit, then you're not really attached to the outcome. You're just attached to your integrity in that role. And so that projection coming in from others can be very clean if the person doing the role has a clear understanding of what they're doing.
Yes, I think that's beautifully said. I always, we've talked about this, and I think you probably have heard me say this when I've talked about acting as shamanism, because it really was like, I really see that as shamanic training for me. I also think you have to, like, sometimes, you know, the actors or performers that you see can't leave the stage when they've left the stage. You know, the stage is a moment for everybody, you know, and it's like, as a performer or a speaker or whatever you're doing on a stage, if you're giving a speech somewhere, once you walk off the stage, it's done, it's over, that moment is gone. But you'll see some people dining out, you know, in the bar, dining out on their glory from the stage, and that's okay. Like that, you know, it's a bit sad because something in them still needs to dine out on it, and I have empathy for that. But I think it's also being really present. It's like, okay, now I'm doing this thing on stage. Well, we're all doing it, because I always maintain that if you're on stage, and I say this to the audiences I've spoken to, the audience is way more in charge of you who are on the stage than they're often aware of. You know, they're in charge, they're driving much, even though you might have the talking stick, they're kind of driving it, because their energy is informing and merging with what you're doing and directing you in a way.
Yeah, absolutely. They are the hidden actor.
Yeah.
Right? The hidden actor, the fourth wall. Yeah, I think that's very interesting. And I think that, you know, in a shamanic sense, that reminds me of this necessity of opening, but also the necessity of closing.
Yes.
That closing, ending, those things they take a certain level of maturity, and they're necessary. You learn that. You know, I remember my teacher teaching me how to open a circuit, open a circle. And she would say, now remember, when you're done, always close. And I would say, I spent so much work. That was so much effort, opening up to all the directions and opening all of my antenna and doing my whole thing. I want to sit in that. I want to enjoy it. And she's like, well, you'll see. It's like leaving all the doors and windows open to your house. Yeah. You'll get exhausted, you know, and all sorts of things are going to blow through. So I think that's, you know, it's hard when you're an actor on stage and you're receiving that love and attention and you don't have that internally for yourself personally, then you dine out on it. But it's not healthy, you know, it's not healthy for the person ultimately.
No, and I will say that for sure, as a kid, I was dining out on it, but not in a way that I think was ever taking anyone else hostage. I was just hungry. You know, it's like, oh, I did something that I was validated for, you know, because I was in imbalance around feeling validated. So yeah, I think it's a stage that you go through, and like you said, just the more you practice it, it's like anything, the more you do anything in life, if you're growing with it, you will grow in your relationship to that thing.
Absolutely. I think we all go through that stage and we look back on that part of ourselves with a lot of compassion.
Yeah.
I'm fascinated. I mean, there's about 3 stones that I could step on right now, and I'm fascinated about many things. I'm fascinated about how you became so balanced in yourself after going through such an extreme experience as a child, being sensitive and being overweight and really struggling with your body, struggling with your hunger and your need to soothe those hard feelings inside, how that switch happened so quickly and you were able through your life to figure out how to stabilize and ground and find that self-worth and that internal trust. Because I think that's the other, like, trust is blaring. It's like, well, there's the trust of people outside of us and being like, do I trust you? You're suddenly treating me very differently because of this external change. But also learning how to trust yourself and learning how to hold those tender parts of yourself. Would you say that came through your work with other teachers, or did that come through your work with the Z's and with your channel material that you've done for yourself and others?
I would say everything. And it's interesting because, you know, when you tell your story, like at the beginning, you know, you asked me what my awakening was. When I'm telling those stories, and I think this is true for any of us, I'm sure for anyone watching or listening, if you tell your own story from like 10, 20 years ago, you'll tell the story, but it's like remembering a different person. Like, you know, you were that person, but it's almost like 3 lives ago, you know, in terms of who you've become. So I think, in all honesty, it's taken a lot of time. Like, I could give you lots of examples of where I struggled, or where I manifested a romantic relationship of 2 years that was really imbalanced, that was mirroring my imbalance. You know, it's kind of, but that I didn't get that at the time. You know, at the time I was diving headlong into something for my healing, and I was choosing to learn it, slash maybe the only way I could learn it was through going through that very imbalanced relationship. So again, I think I'm 44. I would say that the hardest year of my life was the 33. The darkest, hardest year of my life was 33. And at that point, I was already doing this work, and it was post probably my biggest awakening experience to date. It was that typical story that you hear from a lot of people where, you know, for like 3 weeks to 3 months, you think that the miracle has landed and everything's amazing. And you're like, oh my God, I don't feel, and you know, and it's so real. It's like you're on LSD. I mean, I've never taken LSD, but it's like you're having like a really good trip without the drugs for like 3 months or however long it lasts for you. And then quite typically, and I've heard this now from enough people to know it's a thing, the bottom dropped out from my world, and I went through the darkest, hardest, like questioning whether I wanted to live kind of 9 months of my life, because everything I thought I knew as true got shattered. And then, of course, I now see that year as the making of me. So I because everything since then has had a leaning into balance, and has had a drive toward balance. And I realized that the extremist side of my personality needed to get retired at a certain point. It was like, you've got me this far and you fought hard to get me out of some tight spots. And sometimes that extreme side of you has been brilliant and has done extreme things like channeling publicly at a time where it was more taboo than it is now, even though I was terrified about that, to be honest. I was devoted to the work. I believed in the power of the work. I enjoyed doing it, and I believed in the transformations I was seeing in the groups of people I was working with. But I was a little bit like, oh God, we're putting this on Facebook, and people that used to know me are now having funny ideas about me. And I had some not very nice messages and public comments from people I used to know who thought that the channel paragraphs we were quoting was my voice. And I remember one of them that really hurt was a friend who I really liked, who I hadn't been in touch with for years. And I don't know whether she'd had a glass of wine or two too many that night. I don't know, because it was quite uncharacteristic. But she was like, the Lee I used to know was funny and grounded and yeah, just good to be around and creative, and like aspects of myself that I didn't think were gone. But what she was saying was, I don't know who this idiot is, thinks he's Jesus. And it was like, that's not what we're saying. But it didn't really matter, because what it made me realize was, it doesn't matter what you're going to do when you put stuff out publicly, is you're going to come up against the perceptions, reactions, triggers for other people. And you're going to have to stand as the front person for that, whether you like it or not. So I had to make a choice to stay devoted to it. So those were kind of like turning point moments for me. So I would honestly say that balance has been hard won. But I honestly think if it wasn't for this work has kind of provided me with so many of the lessons I needed, and so many of the gifts, and not just doing the work for others, but being with others while they are going through the work has been an amazing teacher to me.
That's so wonderful. I get such a beautiful image of you, just like perfectly balanced between, and the criticism that you just brought up, which I think is so significant to so many people right now in our community and in the world, who are being called to stand up, right? To stand up and become visible for who they are, to scale their work, or just to become more present in the world on a world stage. I think that immediately the fear factor that comes in is, how am I going to be perceived, right? And so being able to bravely stand in that fire of criticism or judgment, or, you know, just that that hurt that can come from other people, and being able to withstand it, I think gives you that balanced perspective, that when then people are so like, oh my God, you're the most amazing, you know, the other end of the
Oh
spectrum of
yeah.
perfection, right? Like that, neither of those really sway who you know you are, which is in the center of that, right? And kind of, that just kind of passes through.
Yeah, and you know what, Riz, I should bring up here, I had a great gift bestowed upon me, which was I was very close to 2 or 3 people over the years who I watched dine out on the power that other people attributed to them. And one of those relationships was a very entangled, close relationship. And I was young, so I didn't really, like right now, if I saw that happening, I would intervene, I would step in, I would get in the middle, I would protect the person they were dining out on, and I would have a private word with the person who's vampiring them. But I was too young, and I was also in deference to the power of this person, and still felt like I didn't know things. And I vowed when there was no longer a friendship in that relationship, that I would never stand by that kind of behavior again. And I don't think I had that in me, but if I had it in me to watch other people dine out on people that way, so up close and personal, and to see the damage it did, and to see the damage it did to them, and to see this person not caring, you know, I think narcissism and sociopaths have been a huge theme in our collective consciousness since especially 2016. And yet to see, and I'm not saying that this person, that I could correctly diagnose this person that way, but they definitely had several personality aspects that would behave that way, with no care to the damage they inflicted on others, and with deep justification. So I think that was a gift, because having seen that up close and personal, and seen how distorted that was, yeah, it just, it was a good education early on.
Yeah, these things that don't feel like gifts at the time. It's amazing when we look back. Again, a few different stones we could step on. I'm going to step on a few past, present, future stone. This is a curiosity of mine. So in my personal work, I do a lot of supporting my former selves through some sort of, you know, growth period. So I noticed that former selves and old stories will pop up from time to time, and I try to take that as a chance to bring that former self close. And I'm curious about, one of the things I do is I reference my future self also. Sometimes I send a flare out to my future self, like, help me, help me now, I'm suffering, I need help, I need guidance. I'm curious if that's something that you do in your practice. Do you have a relationship with future self, past self? Does that show up for you?
I don't feel like I have practices like you've just described where you're intentional, but I'm always tracking. So, and that's innate to me. It's not like I'm sitting there going, oh, let me scratch my own navel about what's going on with me. I think that's just the way I'm wired. I can't help but track energy patterns and transformation. So I notice things in myself all the time, like even just this morning. So Stephen, who I'm married to, he kisses my stomach a lot. And it's like a thing for him. And why that's really significant is that in 2015, right before he and I met, I went through this period where I realized I had to make peace with my own stomach. Which, of course, if you think about it, you know, from the age of 8, no one was praising me for my weight or my stomach. So I think even when you lose weight like that, and even if you know, tone up and exercise and stuff, the body dysmorphia overlay can take time to move. So, so, you know, it's something I've been aware of. And even just the other day, like, it hit me that I made an affirmation in the mirror in 2015 when I was really consciously bringing in my partner, like the partner. And I literally looked at myself. I think I was either wearing nothing or maybe I had underwear on. And I was making peace with my body in the state that it was in, which was hard. It wasn't, because I had a lot to say. It's like, oh, if only your stomach was a bit more toned. And I think I just had an experience with a guy that I dated very briefly, where he literally told me that if I did stomach crunches, I'd have a more toned stomach. On like date 2. And I remember when he said it, and that was like I was like, oh dear, oh sweet Jesus, you know, is that where I'm at? And the good news is, at that point I had enough self-respect to walk away and to go, oh, I see, we're playing 2 very different games here. But in my 20s, I had various, of course, self-manifested abusive things like that said to me from different people, which absolutely mirrored how I felt about myself. And so I would be like upset, or they're right, I should eat less and do more stomach crunches and look like an emaciated model on Instagram. You know, I totally was all bought into that big time. And so Stephen doing that just 3 mornings ago, I had a moment where my old body just kind of tensed up, and I noticed it, and I reminded my body that Stephen told me, and I don't think he'll mind me saying this, it's too late now, that he said he quite likes a bit of a stomach on a man. And it's not that I have an enormous stomach, but for me, that has been like one of the things. Like, it's like, you know, I think we all cut ourselves up, you know, having worked with people. It's like we all have the area of our body we're not quite so, oh, if only that looked like that. And of course, when we do that, we forget the parts of our body that other people appreciate. Or that, when I always try and remind myself, when you are 80 years old, if you live that long, you'll look back at yourself and when you're 30 and go, why on earth was I even worrying? Because, so anyway, the reason I bring that up is just the other morning, I had this thing where Stephen was making a point of like kissing my stomach, and I just had to let younger me be grateful and proud that 44-year-old me had not only managed to move through all the shame of being gay that society programs into you, that told me, would I ever even have someone that I live with, and would we be like a married couple, even though that's what I wanted, to kind of go, this is pretty damn good. You've got this Pilates trained dancer who, Stephen, has an extraordinary physique that, you know, years ago I would have gone, oh, I can't be with him because my body isn't quite as good as his is, you know, that stuff. So it was a moment for me, and it was a moment to kind of, to realize I'd come a really long way around no longer devaluing myself, and just really, you know, the thing I really live by, and this is really true, and I've had some big experiences in the last year that have just continued to back this up. We could be dead tomorrow. Any of us, we could be dead tomorrow. And that for me is always the great leveler of like, am I abusing this gift of life that I'm in right now by navel gazing myself down a spiral? Or am I remembering that any of us can die at any second? And am I therefore being present and open to this part of my life and looking back? So I do a lot of that. I do a lot of integrating the past self. I do a little bit less futuring in the last 2 years than I used to, because I feel like I'm in the future that I was so often manifesting for. So I'm trying to just be really present and experience it. And yeah.
Yeah, the future timeline thing can be very complex. I find it's become more complex as I've become more aware of the future timeline possibilities and not wanting to anchor any of them in too much prematurely, not knowing if that is the best one. Definitely proceeding from the present moment is the best. But what you described with Stephen kissing your belly and being thrown back to that 33-year-old self or that younger self, and I call that like closing a time loop, you know? So there's this moment of like need at that time, looking at yourself in the mirror, and then your future self having that moment and feeling that moment kind of link up with itself, and being able to send that love back to that younger self of saying, no, actually, like, look at us now. Look at us with our love and with our relationship and with this beautiful man that loves me so much and loves my belly and loves this body. It's really beautiful. Thank you for sharing that.
And and thank you for bringing up the timeline thing, because as someone who has worked psychically and intuitively, it's been 16 years since I've been doing this as work for people like the public who I don't know necessarily when they first come to me. Um, the timelines have really changed. Like there was a time up until about 2012 where predictions were a little more trackable and were a little more definite. It's like there were three possibilities until 2012, and you could kind of bet on the one that had the biggest energy right now, that was still probably going to be the case in 6 months' time. And
Mm-hmm.
oh boy, I feel like right now we're like 8 to 16. It's like just the exponential speed, and the more multidimensional consciousness that is now available and open to and in us as a collective has really changed the game.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's a very interesting thing. I have this one future self that used to come to me in dream time, and I was connecting with her maybe 6 months ago, and Spirit said, be careful getting too attached to that self, because is she living in the best possible future for you?
Mm.
Not sure she is, and she was living in a pretty stark future. And so I've like pulled back a little bit from connecting with her directly. And sometimes I'll just send a general beacon out of assistance from the future, assistance and guiding. But I do feel, my, my clients often ask me about future stuff, and I've gotten very firm, boundary wise, about saying, like, I don't predict your future. Yeah. Like, I can show you what's happening right now. I can show you stuff that's happened in the past. I can talk to people who have died. I can talk to your counsel, but I'm not going to tell you what's going to happen in the future, because you're in the process of creating your future. So every choice you make is shaping that future. And so I can't pinpoint what's going to happen in yours or anyone else's future. But that's my personal boundary that I come to.
No, and I think I did private sessions for 14 years, because I stopped doing them in 2018 and I started in 2004. And I think by the time I finished, I'd done something like, I don't know, 5,000, 6,000. I was only doing 2 a week in the last couple of years. So my numbers went down in that way. But it did really change. And I always would, I really noticed a difference in that period of time, in terms of what was coming through for people, and especially around timeline stuff. But I think I think that's the old separatist way that we were taught to look at psychics or intuitive healers, was that we were going to sit there quietly and they were going to tell us a bunch of stuff about our future, and then we were going to leave. And I never ascribed to that. I think the reason to use an intuitive gift is to be participatory with the shamanic act of your life. It's like, this is a shamanic act that we're in. Like, however long you live, you probably won't bird's eye view the story of your life very often, but if you do, it's kind of extraordinary. If you really go, oh my God, that was the first 10 years of my life, then the next 10 years, oh my God, then the next, it's pretty wild when you go, oh my God, all the stuff that I've lived through and the way I've changed. And so I think it's always important to be participatory with intuitive predictions, and to recognize that they're often coming to help you reshape what happens, not necessarily to walk you into that definite path, but sometimes you're shown possible timelines so that you go exactly what you did. You're like, oh, I'm not sure about that. I could have walked towards it, but you engaging with that aspect is now going to make you approach a different version of reality with more wholeness, because you recognize that she was living in maybe a slightly too unfurnished apartment for your liking. And you want the apartment that has some of those elements, but has a slightly more plush furniture. I think that's the gift of working with the timelines, but you have to work with them consciously, and you have to know some of that stuff, which I think many of us stumbled through in the early years. I love that these days there are more people speaking about, and this is something I've been passionate about and have done in my work, the grounded ways that we should work with and engage with the worlds of intuition and other realms.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I think self-responsibility comes up really big in that tooling up aspect that we're in right now in our community. It's just how can we become ever more self-responsible and skilled at taking that power into our own hands? Because I think that often people will, we have a very power over dynamic that we're healing from, right? And so I think I'm really moving kind of away from one-on-one work in the sense that I don't want my clients to feel dependent on me to be their connection to source energy or to their counsel. I really want them to feel that connection, feel it true, know that they're not alone, know that they're supported, and then find their own ways of working through their translation device. Like this is our translation device. So how do you translate energy into meaning for yourself? And everyone's going to do it in such a different way.
Yeah, and to play devil's advocate on what you just said, you will also have been the ignition for so many people's intuition just because they got to, you know what I mean? I mean, I know you know that too, so I think the choice to no longer do one-on-one work is a very valid choice.
Mm.
But I know for myself, if I hadn't gone for those first tarot readings, if I hadn't gone and been facilitated through a workshop, I would never have got used to the energy enough that I could then become those things.
Mhm.
So I totally get what you're saying. And that is, dependency is an issue in those relationships that can come up. But I also think you're kind of like an ignition for people too, in that just being in the presence of somebody who is being intuitive for you and around you, and you're participating in it, perhaps as an audience member, if you like, you're also putting yourself in the theater, and
Mhm.
you're going, oh, this is what the feeling of looking at my world from an intuitive standpoint is like. So it can calibrate you too.
Mhm.
Just wanted to
Well,
throw that in.
oh, absolutely. And I want to clarify too, because first of all, I think that we need each other. I think that
Yeah.
there's no shame in that is just true. And even within a community of healers and transformational practitioners, like we need each other. We need each other to support ourselves and our families. I find that doing this work that I do for my family is the most difficult, the most challenging, right? I can do it for strangers all day long, but there's many more interferences the closer it comes to my personal life. And so I need my community to support me. And, we have a wonderful network of ability to refer to each other. But also, I will say that I think my current vision is that those one-on-one sessions are great for
Mm.
re-nesting people in their own bodies and in their own feeling of safety with another person and with themselves and with the earth. Because I think a lot of us highly sensitive folks, we like come down into the body and then we're like touch ground and we're like, oh shit. We like are trying to, how much time do we spend trying to like get out of the body? Just like, God, this is so painful and so terrible and treacherous down here. Like, I just want to get out. I want to be connected to the all again. I want to be feeling safe again. And so for me, I think those one-on-one sessions serve this beautiful purpose of just like helping someone to feel safe again and feel connected and feel able to be here. And then I really love the beauty of group work. I think that small group containers, the relationships that build, the way that people naturally, connect with each other and create that like lattice work of support is just brilliant. And so I envision wanting to bring people through that, which brings me to a question for you, which is community. How do you see community? I just keep hearing in all these different ways, all these different directions, that community is going to be increasingly important in the coming times. And how have you visioned how community might take root on this planet?
Well, you said something a little while ago that alludes to this, and you were talking about how we don't own our own power. And this goes back to when you were talking about, wanting people to own their own power, their own vessel, their own connection. And as you were saying that, it hit me, what we're watching right now is the breakdown of old society that would never have let that happen. And like everybody else, who's watching and seeing some of this stuff, it's heartbreaking, it's gut wrenching, it's worrying, you have all those feelings and reactions. And yet what these guys have told me for so many years, like they've always said 2020 to 2024 is like the hot zone on Earth. Um, and when that was a long way away, I was just like, oh, interesting, interesting. Oh, and now we're in it. And I'm like, oh, sweet Jesus, we're 7 months into 2020 and my God, what a roller coaster. And yet I don't like seeing power abuse. I don't like seeing control. I don't like seeing some of the darker, low vibrational energy that we're seeing play out. But I do feel really with every fiber of my being that this is the reckoning moment. It's kind of like there's no way we could have just time jumped this conflict with old world and new world. The one thing I feel deeply, truly is that we are not going into some dystopian future. However, there might be a bit of a fight about whether we are or we aren't. And so I think the question is going to be how fast the consciousness of us as human beings collectively shifts as to how much damage we incur along the way. And that's something I don't really know what that, because again, that's been created all of the time. The one thing I will say is so far, I think we're doing quite well. Like the Z's have even said, you're all doing so much better right now than it could have been. Like, and they said that 3 years ago and they're still saying that today. And so as much as there are things coming up where it just kind of breaks your heart, you're like, oh God, is this what we're doing? Is this where we're at? I also feel like all of that has to break in some way. Otherwise, we can't go to the next level of community and connected living. And, Riz, you said something, I think it was before we started recording, when we were just talking for a few minutes before. You were talking about wanting to feel connected to our lives, like how we've outsourced so many things. And I think for me and so many other people, the gift of staying home for so long is you do come back to smaller, more connected ways of living. The challenge and the, I would say, for me, byproduct of some of the power abuse that's going on right now is separating everybody. And I think it's because, but here's the irony. The one thing I don't like that's happened, just on my human reaction to that level. But, I've always got one foot on the ground and one arm up here. And the arm up here always goes, that separation was vital. Because if we hadn't been somewhat separated from each other, there wouldn't be enough of a groundswell of, now we need to figure out how to do this in a different way. This is not necessarily the way to solve this problem. We need to do this in a different way. It's now rising, and I think it's going to get stronger and stronger and stronger. So I think what we're going to see is a people revolution in the next few years. And I don't necessarily mean on the streets, although that may have some part of it. But I actually think we're seeing the people revolution take place right now through innovation, not just the innovation of technology, or someone builds a website that really helps people's mental health for free or low cost or whatever. Innovation in the way that people are speaking to each other, being there for each other in community. So I think we're seeing the birth of the next paradigm, but we're in a real birth-death cycle at the moment. So for me, what community could look like is going to really depend on how we organize ourselves when we're through the breakdown of the old world. And my gut tells me, that's really a little ways away. Like, really the date that comes to me is 2030. And I think 2025 to 2030 is the road there. But I think this 2020 to 2024 period is a lot of wrestling. But it's funny because I think we'll look back on Corona, right, what we're in right now, and this whole 4-year period as a game changer. Is it fun when you're in it? Mm-mm. Sometimes it's like euphoric transformation. Sometimes you're like, oh, what the hell, and it's painful and all that stuff. But it's like being in a bad relationship for a few years. When you come out the other side, what you learn and who you become as a result of what you went through is undeniably positive. And so I think we're still in the early stage of our 3-year bad relationship. That's what my gut tells me. That's what my instinct tells me. It's not what I want, but it's just what I feel.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Thank you for sharing your feelings. Yeah. I mean, I think that's, it's the breaking of the glass. The breaking of the glass says life will never be the same. It's like at the end of a wedding, when you break the glass or when you break the plate, it's shattered, it's done. And so there is that feeling right now. We're going through that death phase, the death throes. And I'm also thinking about this quote of this time being a time where love is cleaved from fear, where we see the distinct difference between love and fear. And the coronavirus and Black Lives Matter and like the violence in this country, like it's all coming from this fear, like rising sort of place. And when we talk about how difficult it is on a human level to be separated into our little homes and to our little units of origin in some ways, I kind of think like I get this picture of this like infrared heater coming down, this like cleansing energy that's coming down through the earth, and that each of us needs to kind of bake in our own container with our own families and our own issues and our own challenges and wounds, like in our little pods, that we all need to bake in our own little, I'm getting the onion soup picture. I don't know what those are called. Ramekins, the little ramekins that you bake onion soup in. We're all in our own little onion soups, getting baked and cheesed. And so that when we come back together, when we're on that road and we're figuring out what community means and we're figuring out what the new earth looks like, then the way that we connect becomes intentional. It's not haphazard. It's, we build those pieces one at a time back up. But we're definitely in that death throw and that sort of into that space in between what was and what will be.
Yeah, and there's something that I feel really called to share at this point, and it's a statement that was tricky for me. Well, it wasn't actually. It wasn't tricky for me on a soul level at all, because it made total sense. But on a human level, it presented my mind and how I would like things to be with a few challenges. But the sentence came out like 2-3 years ago from the Z's during a channel. And they said, for those of you who identify as light workers, healers, starseeds, people who are here to help, whatever language or term you give it, because everyone's a little different in the way they see it or terminology they give. And some people don't give a flying fig about the terminology and they just want to be here, to be present and be alive. They said, and this was about 2017, they said the next 8 years or so, you're going to see a lot of challenges on the earth. And you're going to feel, some of them will impact you. And when they're not impacting you and they're impacting others, you're going to feel for people. You're going to feel either grief or empathy or something for the people who are going through those things. And yet, they said, we can also tell you that for any of you listening to this message, you will also see the coming years as the best years of your life so far. Because they said it will be a golden time for you, because you will be feeling more purposeful. And even if your energy isn't able to fully take flight in the way that you feel you are designed to, you will feel your wings flapping in a way that they've never been able to before. And that stuck with me in 2017. And, I always check myself against these messages, because sometimes these messages are really, really true for me. And sometimes I'm delivering them for other people. But not only for me, but for a lot of my community, people who I know, some of whom do this kind of stuff publicly, others who don't, but who identify, with some of that stuff. It's been true. Like,
Mhm.
it's been true. And even with the world going through what it's going through right now, many things of which I would like to change if I could wave a magic wand, I've never felt more alive. I've never felt more present. I've never felt more purposeful. And I'm only saying something I'm hearing a lot of people saying. And
Mhm.
so I really hung to that message. It's like, yeah, sure, we could go back to when things were a bit more comfortable, but also a bit more asleep.
Mhm.
So I'm fascinated by that because we're 3 years into that 8-year timeline they were talking about. So
Mhm.
for what
Yeah.
it's worth, I felt to share that.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, I think that that's that. I think those of us do this work where we feed on truth energy. And I think that that truth energy is coming to the surface right now. And that untruth energy is starting to burn away. And that untruth energy is what keeps us asleep. And it keeps us, all the comfort things that we have pretty much is untruth energy. It's
Yeah.
fun actually to go onto Netflix and see all this truth energy coming through, even the thing that people usually use to keep themselves from waking up, right? Netflix
Yeah.
and forget it. You know, you go on Netflix now and it's all Black Lives Matter, you know, like it's
Yeah.
a lot of these like truth energy pieces. It's like, okay, you want to relax, but let's learn something while you relax. Let's grow our truth barometer a little
I
bit.
I had a really direct experience around the book White Fragility. We were in Canada and we were doing some live dates in Canada in early March, right before everything got crazy. And we had a really good week and we had these wonderful live events. And in between, Stephen and I were spending a few days in Toronto. He lived there for a year when he was doing The Lion King, and so he loves it there, and it was great. It was like, let's just be there for a few days and see some people. We went to this bookshop one day, which was great because I feel like I go shopping when we go and do live events, you know what I mean? Otherwise I'm like quite happy to just stay at home forever. But it was fun, and there was this old bookstore and I saw this book, and it was one copy and it was on a table and it said White Fragility, and I remember thinking, that's brilliant. I knew white privilege, but I thought, what a brilliant title. And it immediately drew me in. And, Stephen is Black. So since we've been together for 5 years, I've had a much more direct understanding of my white privilege than I ever did. Even though I've had friends and people of color in my life, when you marry, well, through marrying Stephen, my eyes opened even wider,
Mhm.
Um, and so I bought this book and I read, I think, the first 3 or 4 chapters of it. And then I laid it to rest for a little. It's quite normal. I'll do a few chapters, then I'll leave it for a couple of months and I'll go back. And then lo and behold, it's the #1 book on Amazon, like weeks later, and everybody's talking about it. So why that story was significant to me was it was so cool because it was this, like, as far as I was concerned, I'd recommended that book. I'd even shared it on Facebook and no one had heard of it. And to me, that book would have remained a really cool book and what it stands for perhaps 5 years. And I might occasionally recommend it to someone. And now I don't need to because it's like it's everywhere. So that to me is one of the really profound things of this time. It's like, wow, look at how all of this has risen to the surface at lightning speed and became the focal point for everybody. Even if they were resisting it or fighting it, it became the focal point.
Mhm.
So I think that's what's fascinating about this time right now, because my old mind had a trajectory around that book. I didn't really overly think about it, but I was like, what a cool book. And I told a few friends about it and I shared it. But yeah, I thought, and I even thought, oh, I should try and get her on our podcast. It'd be great to talk to her about this. I wonder if she'd come on. Of course, now she's going to be like far too busy and I don't need to get her on the podcast because her message and the message of so many others who do similar work to Robin is out there and is front and center. So that's been really cool to see that as one of many issues that we need to surfacing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And the word hive mind comes up. And I think
Mm.
that we're in this really interesting time, right? Where, because we're having such a collective experience where never before, right? I thought I was going to take aliens landing. Honestly, I was like, before humans realize we're all in this together, we're all human beings. We're all together, right? It's not about these lines that we've drawn on a map. Like, we are all human beings. We're all having this experience. And it took Corona, you know, for us to like really feel that. Like, no one is untouched by this experience. We're having it together. And it's fascinating how the anti-racism movement and Black Lives Matter and all this has kind of come up under the ground of the coronavirus. They're just so, they seem so separate, but completely linked, right? Completely part of the same weave. And yeah, again, like, I just keep getting this image of like the hunger for truth, that there's just this popping, this people waking up and just being really, really hungry for truth. And those of us who have been doing this work for a while of connecting with spirit and bringing truth energy down into the earth and into our bodies and into each other's hearts are like, finally, like, our time is here. We're here. We're ready to hold you, you know? And so I have one last question for you about that. So as so many more people are coming online, and I know that your business has had a surge of people who are finding your work and feeling your work and joining the community, how do you hold such a wide spectrum? Because you've got the old guard, you've got the people who have been doing this work for decades, and then you have people who are just opening their eyes for the first time and are very new and very open and, you know, have no idea what's happening. They're just like, what is this that I've just stumbled into? I need it. I'm hungry for it, but I have no idea. How do you, when you're working online and you're working with hundreds or thousands of people, how do you hold a large enough container to really speak to all people in all these different levels of awakening?
You know, the way I look at it, so when I do my energy updates, I try and get as much information out as I can within like 25 minutes to cover a range of people's experiences, because everyone's a little different. Everyone's experiencing things differently. But I also know that there's a limit to how much I can cover. There will be people out there for whom I'm not the right person, or my language, or they just actually don't like me or my delivery or something, that I won't be for them. So I think the people pleaser in me, who died a very long, slow, painful death, and now kind of like every now and then tries to get my attention, and I tell him to politely calm down and sit at the back, because I think we're doing okay, without adding extra egg to the pudding. You know, the people pleaser in me will respond to exactly what you just addressed. It's like, I don't look at many comments online, but I will track comments like the first day the energy update goes out, because I want to see how people are responding to things, or if someone's in a course of mine, or if someone's, you know, bought a recording or joined the membership community. Of course, I'm paying attention to what's going on in there, because it's a relay and I need to listen so that I serve. And there will occasionally be someone going, oh, I wish you could do a product on this. And I have to, at that point, when a part of me that wants to go, oh, this person's asking for a really basics thing, I have to really honor when I'm the right person to do it and when it's for someone else. Because there are times I'll see something like that and I'll go, you know what? Not only is that a great idea, but I feel I could add some value to that area, and I feel a compulsion to do it. So I will. In October, that's going to be the focus of the MP3, because, you know, we're often working a few months ahead. Well, that's not true, actually. The MP3s work a month ahead, but there's, you know, there's normally like the right time for things. So I think it's also knowing that none of us, whether it's in life or in work, can ever be for everybody. And if you try and serve everyone else without checking it's true for you, you give them a really nutritionally deficient product. You give them, you try to please them when they ask you for, they say, please make me a healthy milkshake. And you're like, oh, I'd love to please you. I don't know how to make a healthy milkshake. I'll try, you know? So you go, here's your healthy milkshake. And they're like, oh, thanks. And they're like, and they start to have a sugar reaction. And you're like, oh, I just put a little bit of sugar and that, you know. So I think there's something about, you have to know what you can do, because there's so much you could do. And we do a lot. Like, I do a lot. I serve many different varied arms. So I've got really good, I think, at knowing what I shouldn't do.
Mhm.
Because I'm working to often capacity, and I don't mean I'm exhausting myself, but I mean I'm at capacity of how many varying things I want to offer without dropping the quality level. Because if I tried to add one more thing right now, the quality would go down, and that's I'm never going to be happy about that. Obviously, there'll be variations of quality, but we'll always strive for quality. And if we don't make it, we don't make it. We tried. Our intent was there. So I think that's it. I think it's knowing that if you can't provide that product that they want, the basics, someone else will, and they'll go and find it. Because the one thing I teach about why it's important not to people please when you've got someone knocking at your door, telling you they're desperate for you to help them, and you are drained and exhausted, is if you let them into your house and don't pay attention to your body, they're going to get half your energy. You're going to drain yourself into the ground, and they're not going to go and knock at the door of your neighbor next, who would have been perfect for them. And it's
Mm.
that thing of thinking, I'm the healer, so I've got to heal them.
Mhm.
7+ billion healers on this planet. Some of them direct, like there are direct healers who can hold space for you. And then there are the indirect healers like Trump is right now. You know,
Mm.
he's not a direct healer, but boy, oh boy, is he catalyzing a worldwide healing in so many different ways. And that started with his election campaign.
Mhm.
So there are the catalytic healers that aren't necessarily conscious or holding space for you as a healer, but all of us are healing each other, right? All the time. It's like when we're slightly snappy at someone and someone gives us a look, they help me. Oh, I'm like, oh God, yeah, I need to. How did I get to that? How do I change that next time? So, but yeah, I think it's the same with holding space for your community. You have to trust that you never want to serve your community without serving from a place inside yourself that is true and authentic.
Mhm.
Because it's better to let your community go and find someone else. Like, you know, the day that I feel I can't do this anymore, I'm not going to try and hang on to it. Just
Mhm.
because we've built a community and because we serve them, it would, you know, it'd be very sad for me. But I really considered stopping doing this work in 2016, and I gave it a year of serious consideration. And then at the end of the year, I actually transformed, but only because I gave myself permission to walk away. So I think it's important to authentically do and give what you can, but to not people please as a creator. Otherwise, you start renting yourself out in a very dodgy deal to other people.
Mhm. Absolutely. Absolutely. Wow, that was such a full answer. I feel like that, I mean, that what you just gave right there, there's just so much that people could really, I think people should watch that again. Just rewind what that one answer was and watch that again. Because just the idea that you could, if someone comes to you in desperation for your help and you feel so compelled to help them, right? First of all, that's a red flag, right? When someone's like, that desperation is always for me now, it's a red flag. But to say that if I do help you and it's coming from a place of depletion, I'm giving you more, you're coming in deeper, there's not that compulsion to help you, but you're asking for it and I let you in anyway, that I'm actually not serving you
Mm.
because the person to help you might have been next door and you never go there, right? That idea is, that's beautiful. Beautiful permission for all of our people pleasing healers out there to know
And I
that.
will throw this in, and especially Riz, you'll know this because you're a super mama. And I think anyone who's a parent knows this. My sister illustrated this lesson to me beautifully when my nephews, uh, my sister has two sets of twin boys.
Oh.
So Edward and Max are, I think they're about to turn 18, or they just did turn 18 actually. So this is like 16 years ago, actually maybe 17 years ago. They were little and they were playing in the house in another room. And I'm sat with my sister catching up because we didn't, you know, we lived a couple of hours away from each other. So we saw each other maybe 4 or 5 times a year. I'm catching up with her. One of them screams. My sister just carries on talking to me, and I'm like, you know, still, you know, haven't had nephews and nieces for very long, so I'm still like, oh my God, you know, do we have to go and save the child? And my sister just carries on like nothing, and I said, are they? And she went, oh no, they're fine. And I'm like, oh okay. And then we carry on talking, and 3 minutes later, there's a very different kind of scream, and my sister is off, like just like breaks the conversation because she knows the difference in the scream. She knows what scream is like, oh, I'm a bit upset, I'd like some attention. And she knows what scream is, oh, he just bit me, you know, kind of like I'm in horror and shock and trauma.
Yeah.
So the thing I always say about that, because some people, especially when you're learning your boundaries, and the only reason I can say to you what I said is because I went through years of people pleasing and putting myself in deficit. And I'm sure there were some people who did that for me when I was desperate in my early 20s, as I often was when I was like all over the place with things, is that you will know when it's an emergency
Mm-hmm.
and you will have the energy. It's like people just, we find the energy when we are the person that are supposed to help. Because some people get very worried. They're like, what if I'm their last port of call? And what if and that is part of the codependent people pleasing dialogue that you have that keeps you in that cycle. You'll know, like the day someone knocks at your door and you thought you were exhausted, but they clearly are in an emergency situation, you'll forget about your exhaustion and you'll make them bigger than you in that moment. And there will be an energy that will come through you.
Mm-hmm.
So don't worry about that. The universe will help you know when it's important.
That's wonderful. Wonderful advice. So just one last thing, because you
Mhm.
are a mother in your own way, right? You
Mhm.
are a mega producer of all sorts of creative babies. So anyone who is not tapped into Lee Harris energy and the work that you do, please get tapped in. The portal is such a profound value. I can't even believe how much you guys put into it. It's so magnificent. It feeds so many people.
Mm.
How do you stay balanced? I know that you have a love of freedom from our friendship. I know that this is something we share, this love of freedom. So for those of us who love freedom, we don't necessarily love structure so much,
Yeah.
but I find that consistency, it's been calling me. I know that the consistency and structure is something that helps us stay balanced. How do you stay balanced in your
Yeah.
day?
There was a time when I loved wafting around and sitting in a coffee shop and like visioning something. You know what I mean? You know, I had
Yeah.
years where I loved that. And I'm like, oh, I remember that. You know, it's like, and I'm so glad I had it. And I'm so glad I loved it. And I'm so glad I had the romance of it. And now I have a much more structured life than I would ever have thought I would have wanted or allowed. But I have also structured gaps and structured space. So I would say one of the biggest things for me that have helped me become very stable with my high productivity in the last few years is I really turned my attention toward exercise. Left to my own devices, I wouldn't probably exercise. I know it's good for me and I know it feels good, but honestly, if you said, oh, Lee, there's going to be no downside to you not exercising, I'd be like, oh, okay. I'd be like, cool, that's going to give me a bit more time to create stuff, which I love. But I made it a discipline. I made it a thing. And I was very grateful that I had gone beyond that, can I pay my rent this month phase. So I was able to basically take some of the extra money I was earning and go, I'm going to pay somebody who's really good, a trainer, to help motivate me, to help teach me, and to be the expertise that I don't have around training. So I've been doing functional fitness training for the last, well, it's been 3 years, but for the last 2 years, I've been doing it 6 days a week, Monday through Saturday. And I do it one-on-one because that works for me. Other people love classes. Some people train themselves. Stephen loves training himself with DVDs. Doesn't work for me. I like the one-on-one attention. I like the connection. I like the camaraderie, but I also like leaning on Jenny, my trainer's expertise and motivation on the days that I'm like, oh, I don't really want to do this. So that helped. That was like a baseline, doing that every morning. But I have an amazing team of people around me, and I'm really grateful to have been able to reach a place emotionally where everyone around me was great, because it wasn't always that way. I had some learning lessons with various people I work with, as everybody does. But also that the business grew to such a level that it could hold that. And so I've managed to step out of certain things more as we've produced more. It's been a learning curve I wouldn't even say to micromanage, but to not need my energy signature on every single thing that we produce, and to know that I've worked long enough with the people who are now in charge of it that they kind of know what I'm going to say. You know, it's like they know, oh, Lee won't like that, or Lee will suggest this. But equally that they bring their talents and things that they see and do that I would never have done. So yeah, I would say it's really been being willing to structure myself a bit more and really caring about what I do. And honestly, if I died tomorrow, I would say two things surprise me about the work I'm doing today. Number one, that it's as widely used, and that makes me really happy because, you know, I used to go to workshops on credit cards and all kinds of stuff to make self-growth happen in my early 20s when we really could only purchase stuff. You know, we would go to bookshops. So it pleases me no end that we can be really good value, which is very important to me. I like to keep things as affordable as we possibly can, and also free. Like there's a ton of free stuff that I'm paying for us to produce every month, and that makes me happy that people never have to pay a dime for, which is great. But also the experience of what I'm doing. So number one, when I stand back and go, wow, you know, 300, 400,000 people are seeing the energy update every month, that blows my mind. But the experience of it is so, it's incredible. Like, cause I kind of go, oh my God, I remember, like, you know, can I pay the rent this month? I've just gone pro as a channeler, but I was thrilled. I was like, oh my God, I paid my rent just from doing readings. It was touch and go, but I did it. What a miracle. Now I look at this as a miracle and go, wow, what an experience. So honestly, I really recognize the privilege of my position, like to be able to be in this position. It wasn't overnight. And I recognize I'm incredibly lucky, and I have a very rich experience with the people that we serve and the people I get to work with, who are my family, you know, to do it. So, yeah.
Oh, that's beautiful. Well, that soul satisfaction of the impact that you know that you're making, plus the amazing team that you get to work with, to collaborate with, that must be just, it must just juice, you know, bring juice into your heart to get to work with such a great group of people and co-create, you know, this wonderful material that you're sharing. And I know you guys share so much for free that has so much amazing value to it. So you guys are in just a beautiful place right now. It's lovely to witness and participate in.
Thank you.
Oh, well, Lee, I could talk to you for ages, but I'm going to let you go. I am so grateful that you took time out of your busy schedule to come and talk with us today. And also, we're going to release this a little earlier than we were going to expect to release it. So we're going to release it in August. So those of you who are watching it now in early August, Lee has an offering called Transmissions that is coming right up. And that's why we're going to offer this a little early so that you have time to jump on board, because this is going to be a really interesting hybrid of an event that I've gone to and something that's meant for this time. So Lee, do you want to just describe it a little bit?
Yeah, so I have not done like a dominantly channeled course or online experience for about a decade. And I felt really called because of the amount of change. I mean, we're doing lots of different courses and I love them all. It's always great to do an online event like this. But Transmissions was a response in me that I thought I need the Z's to really have the time to give us an energy blueprint for the next decade. Because the Z's will answer, so the Z's are my guides, and when I do my monthly video broadcast in the portal, my membership community, I'll channel for about the last 30 minutes of the 90 minutes. And so the Z's will take questions live from members of the community or pre-submitted as well. We kind of mix it up for the people who can't make it live. But this is different. This is the Z's talking about 4 areas of our lives. So, you know, the kind of the words they gave me was meet your future self now. And we're going to talk about becoming a magnetic soul. You see, now I'm having to remember what they are. Magnetic soul. Yeah, I won't even remember what they are because I'm not in that grounded mind, but it's really about your magnetic presence and this next decade. So I'm delivering it live because I wanted it really curated and responsive to the people who show up. And on the in-between days, I commissioned Devor Bozique. I said, could you create us a sound healing album? 10-minute pieces. I want 5 of them. I want people to get the first one when they sign up. And then I want them to have a special piece on every middle day so that they can just have 10 minutes of music. And then as the project evolved, we both kind of ended up agreeing that I should add some spoken words to it. So I channeled these. They're kind of like poems. They're kind of like affirmations. One is called time, one is called play, one is called flow, one is called space, one is called peace. And they are these spoken word musical pieces. So we actually ended up making a musical and spoken word sound healing album as well, which is part of Transmissions. And we may release that album on Spotify and iTunes next April, but we're gonna not do it before then. So anybody who comes into Transmissions will get these 5 sessions with the Z's, and the final one is a Q&A with anybody who comes in. And these 5 musical pieces to help you integrate the whole experience and really calibrate your blueprint for where we're going. So it's such a cliche to say you're excited about something, because, you know, everybody says that. But I really am. You know, I'm because I'm going to be hearing this stuff for the first time too.
Yeah, well, it's amazing. I mean, there's a couple things about that. One is that the point you just made is don't do anything that you don't feel really compelled and excited to do, right? Because that's the truth barometer, is like, I feel really compelled to do this. I'm excited about it, you know. And for those of us that channel, like, we're healing, we're learning. The channeling's coming in for us as much as anybody else, and so it's exciting. And you guys, this is a big project, and I get this image of, you know, the Costa Rica trip that you do, the Soul Magic trip, and at night, that beautiful Z transmission that you would do in the evening, and the people that work at Blue Spirit being invited to come in as well, and everybody just laying down in that beautiful space and receiving from you and Devore the music and the words and the transmission. So I know I'm going to be in your audience enjoying this. This sounds fantastic, and lovely that you can provide this on a digital, you know, landscape so that people all over the world can attend it, you know.
And like anything, obviously we're delivering certain sessions live, but everything is video archived, audio archived. We're also, for the first time, doing transcripts. So they might take 24 hours to appear, but for the people who want to read. So, and then you have forever access to it. So, you know, for those who want to be part of it, but can't necessarily show up at all the live times, you'll be able to access it any time, but it won't be available after this. I feel strongly now that I like curating experiences where we can hold people. So once it's over, which I think is August 26th, registration will close.
That's wonderful. So you can really hold a good container for that. And you're
we have a
brilliant
great
at,
team
like,
for that.
You always, when you do your channeling, you're brilliant at holding the audience, you know, through the camera, whoever's attending in that moment in the future, you know, and having it bottled in that way where you can watch it again and again. I know that even your energy updates, I'll watch like 5 times just to like really get the fullness of it. But of course, channeling even more so, you know, that has even a more intricate sort of DNA to it. And so it's lovely to have those recorded and able to rewatch. Well, we all know I'm a huge fan of yours, and I love your work, and I love you very much as a person. So
I'm a big fan of yours, honey, and I love you very much. So this has been lovely, and thank you for inviting me, and thank you to anyone who tuned in for this. And big love for all that you are doing in the world.
Thank you very much. And watch Stephen's episode as well. We already recorded Stephen's a few months ago before coronavirus, and his is coming out in December. So in a few months after this airs, Stephen's will air, and I'm fascinated to see how it applies to where we are in December, which obviously we aren't yet there.
Great.
Well, thank you very much, Lee, and thank you to our audience for participating and watching and being here with us. I definitely felt everyone who will watch this in the future being here with us today, and we'll see you next month with a new story of awakening. Thank you. Bye.
The waves, I'm here to float, find my place above, below. They call